Hello and welcome back. I'm Aarti Maharaj at Ethisphere, and joining me on this interview is Erik Dullea at partner at Husch Blackwell. I was jumping ahead there to the Husch Blackwell, but we have Erik Dullea, partner at Husch Blackwell. In this conversation, Erik is going to share his perspectives and insights on the topic of AI and ethics. So, Erik, it's great to have you here in person. Thank
Thanks
you
for
so much for taking the time out to chat with us on this topic. That's pretty much top of mind for everyone over the last couple of days.
right. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Of course, yes. And I guess my first question to you, Erik, is could you tell us more about your area of focus and tell us a little bit about your background? And then we'll dive into each part that we've outlined.
Sure. I'm a partner at Husch Blackwell, as you mentioned. I work out of the Denver office. I'm the chair of our cybersecurity practice group. I'm a member of the data privacy group, and I'm the cybersecurity lead for our AI practice group as well.
So you're very busy.
I am busy, yes.
So with that in mind, just first to talk a little bit more about what you do and what your experience with clients, could you share some of the common ethical AI dilemmas that you've come across over the last couple of months or since the start of this year? And do any of these surprise you?
Sure. I would say the one that surprises me the most is the wide range of reactions that we're seeing from organizations and from the business units within those organizations on what to do with AI. And I have clients, and the range goes from I've got to have it, I needed to have it yesterday.
Right.
And I have others that are like, no way, no how, not on my watch.
Yeah.
And it is sorting through the process of getting those diverse stakeholders accustomed to the concept of AI, the pitfalls of AI, what to be aware of, and then how to use it in a safe, viable, ethical manner for an organization that will deliver the results that a company is looking for and also not damage the reputation of the company and minimize the risk of something, in a sense, going wrong and having a disparate or an unforeseen outcome that harms individuals or their interests.
Yeah, and it's sort of difficult where we're at right now because AI is, we're still trying to wrap our brain around it. So it's just sort of being prepared for what's ahead.
Right. And within that, you have the aspect of what we think of as AI and historically how it has been utilized. And this can go back to the 60s or the 70s with machine learning. But to think about it now, the pace at which it has evolved is one where we're sort of thinking about the model that was viable 2 days ago as opposed to what might be available 6 months from now.
Right.
And there may be some evolutionary improvements between those two systems.
Anything on that front surprises you right now?
I think what surprises me and what is a bit of a challenge for developers and for companies that are going to deploy an AI system are the breadth and the scope of the topics that they need to think about when they are entertaining using an AI model or a tool. So you need to be thinking about the data itself. How is the data collected? How is it organized? How is it labeled? Because for a lot of that data may be, world history, so to speak. It's facts that are in our universe, on our planet, that we all know. But it's data that comes from the 50s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, which may not align with what we view as social values and goals for 2024. And when that is given to an AI model, which is a clean slate where it will derive its own conclusions, it may draw conclusions based on older data that are not in line with what we would like to see and what we think society should be reflecting today. And it's having a diverse set of stakeholders that can come in and remind the technicians that, and from a philosophical standpoint, from an ethical standpoint, from a sociological standpoint, we need to be on the lookout for unintended consequences.
Staying on that topic and just kind of to move a little bit beyond that, but unintended consequences, right?
Yeah.
So how can companies, specifically compliance department, address what is considered permissible as it relates to AI?
How to address permissible? I think there it will be a question of ongoing monitoring. And you have to keep in mind that an AI system is not a buy it and forget it type of product. It is a product that will unlike a forklift. If I buy a forklift and I put it on my warehouse floor, I know how it's going to work. I know what it's going to do. And 12 months from now, it's probably going to be performing in an identical fashion to the day we put it on the floor. For an AI model, it is going to be learning as it goes and as it works. So the aspirational goal and the expectation is it will become better at its performance. But there is the possibility that as it gets data, it may draw a conclusion that is logical from its algorithmic standpoint, but not what we necessarily expected or intended it to do.
Right.
I can give you an example if you want a case study sort. So roughly 2015 or so, a large global shipping company was looking to use AI to help its hiring process, specifically in the technology sector. So they directed their team to develop it, and the goal was for it to be blind on gender, blind on race, and to look at resumes and find the best candidates for these types of jobs. Gave it the data, it began running its process, and what the compliance folks noticed on the end for the outcomes were that men were being selected and having their resumes filtered to the top, and women were being, in a sense, downgraded on their performance. They go back to the developers, raise this concern, and there was a bit of pushback to say, no, it is gender blind. What we hadn't taken into account was that when the data was given to the model, it used data from the last 30 years, where men were predominantly the leaders and at the forefront of the technological industry. As a result, the algorithm started drawing conclusions that if men have been in the job in the past, men should be in the job in the future.
Right. So that's going to be elevated.
Right. So that, it wasn't a goal, it wasn't an intent from the developers, but it was just an unforeseen consequence.
And could you share some tips on how GCs, CLOs, and CECOs can make ethical AI a business differentiator? And you and I were sort of chatting about this a little bit yesterday of, we need to have more public-private partnerships.
Sure.
So it would be great to just hear your perspective and bring that to our audience.
Yeah, let's start. Let's put the private partnerships near the back of that part of it. So if I forget, please remind me.
Of course, I am here for that.
Cool. For GCs, compliance officers, teams like that, I think it's important to take your company values, the mission statement, the vision that the corporation has, its principles, and make sure that those are being articulated and woven into the initiatives to have AI. So it might mean that you need to take some of those higher level statements and operationalize them a bit, give them to a team and have the team be thinking about how do we factor in this goal and what we value as part of our corporate reputation in the product that we're going to be developing. If I can give props of Cornell University's Professor Sumitra Duda. I'm doing his AI governance certification course. And he has a compliance strategy that he's built out that factors in looking at automation and innovation, sort of as the technological or the efficiency business goals that we think about, balancing that with data governance and also agency of people. So you get those four pillars, in a sense, that you need to be looking at. And imbued within all of them is the need for trust. And building out trust in an AI system and how it's going to perform, the data that it used to learn, and then the purpose and the algorithm by which it's going to be operating are really going to be essential for our consumers, for employees, for business leaders, and for society as a whole.
And could you share a little bit more about the agency for people? I think that's an interesting pillar, and I'd like to know more because, in the conversations we've been having, you hear more about it taking on a human-centric approach. So it'd be great just to hear more about that. Yeah.
The agency of people aspect is bringing in those diverse stakeholder groups, not having it be exclusively a technical problem, but that socio-technical reciprocal feeding of each other, that our technology needs to be leading to better outcomes for people. And then people would be then identifying where they can use technologies to make their lives better and having that sort of feedback loop. But it's something where our HR people, our philosophy majors, so to speak, ethicists, all need to be involved in identifying how something can be used, where it can be used, and also when it can be used. Right. There are some technologies that we might roll into the US marketplace that might not have a significant disruption for society. But if we use that same technology in a lesser developed part of the world, it could be, cause upheaval and affect, the earning power and the living conditions of individuals that suddenly are without a job and don't have skill sets to be adapting because that technology came in too quickly.
Yeah, and that's something I feel like we're gonna have to talk about a little bit more in detail, and I'm sure there are going to be a lot of changes as the time goes by as well.
Right.
But I wanted to switch gears a bit and talk about digital ethics.
Okay.
And based on your practice, are you seeing new trends on the digital ethics front? And for example, do you think digital ethics will eventually find its way into conversations companies have with investors and regulators around ethics and compliance metrics?
I think where I'm seeing that right now is more in, I guess I haven't thought of it in the sense of digital ethics per se. I see it in the twofold aspect of the data privacy.
Right. So we have one
Concept.
stream of data privacy.
Right.
Okay.
And so there we are thinking about, we have data. It is associated with individuals, and what are we doing with it? How are we using it? Is the means by which we collected it consistent with what we're using it for? Did we have consent in order to collect the data? Then there's also the information security piece of it, which is sort of the other, the flip side of the same coin. Protecting the data that you've acquired, protecting the network that you house it on, and making sure that it's not being misused.
Yeah.
And there I am starting to see a shift based on not only the approach of the federal government, but also within the private sector, in part in response to agency regulation, of being a bit more transparent on how, when mishaps occur, getting the news out, and then addressing how you respond to it.
Right. And finally, because I know we're almost out of time, but let's talk about predictions, Erik's predictions. What are some ethical rules companies should be aware of in the coming years?
I've got, I guess, two of them, and they both two analogies that I would use that both come into the same concept. One of them comes from my Navy days, and that is in a sense that the quote being slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And it's an aspect of practicing and being deliberate in your actions can lead to a more efficient and faster outcome in the long run. The other way to think about it in the private sector side, and I got this story from Trevor Hughes at IAPP's conference a couple months ago. Mercedes-Benz, was built. Carl Benz invented the internal combustion engine, put it on a wagon, and was driving it around Germany, and cars back in the late 1800s were viewed as death traps because they moved as fast or a little faster than horses, but they would go out of control. His wife, Bertha Benz, was an inventor, and she borrowed the car one day to drive to see her family, but she had to make repairs along the way as she went, and at one of the points, she convinced a shoe salesman, a cobbler, to put leather pads on the brakes. So she invented a better stopping mechanism for the car. And in turn, because the car was better at stopping, you were able to drive it faster.
Right.
So we wind up covering more ground and getting from A to B to C faster because we're able to stop along the way when there's something unexpected. So with AI, I think it's going to be important for corporate leaders to recognize, put the brakes on. Let's figure out if this is doing what we wanted it to do, and then we'll start moving forward again. Because if we just go forward and aren't able to pause, we might wind up with a model, such as for that shipping company, that starts to do things we didn't expect. And in the case of that shipping company, for that model, the model had been trained with enough data that you couldn't untrain it or correct it. They had to scrap the project. So there you have a reputational injury to the company, so to speak, wasted resources on a project, and then going back to square one to buy and develop a new model.
Yeah. And just to sort of build off of that and just come back full circle, because you're speaking about corporate leaders, public-private partnerships. Wanted to have you just sort of close off this conversations on what you think, what the phases look like, and where do you see this going in a couple of years?
Sure. I think, and we've heard it from the government a couple of times. It comes out cybersecurity and technological defense is a team sport.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll confess, from my background, retired military, so I was in the DoD side of life, thinking about world problems. Went to the private sector. I spent 2 years recently back in the general counsel's office for one of the intelligence agencies, looking at things, but also thinking about cyber warfare and cyber defense. And General Nakasone has a good quote when he testified before Congress, and he was talking about who has insights and knowledge about this technological arms race, or this sort of hybrid warfare that we see between nation-state actors, organized crime, hacktivists, and then ransomware as a service. All of these things are just making challenges for corporate leaders. And the government has a mission, and it's an important one, to look outside of our borders at what threats are. Private sector has the insights into its own network, its own data, and what it is seeing. But the federal government is not supposed to be, and they don't want to be, and they strive not to, looking at that same data. So we need to have that collaboration and that conversation of what a private sector is seeing, and then talking to the federal agencies that are responsible for supporting that industry sector to say, here's what we're seeing from the outside, or here's what we think the threats are, and allowing that synergy or that conversation to happen so that both sides can be more informed.
Yeah, and it's sort of creating a community.
Yeah,
for sure. Erik, it was great having you on this
Thanks.
program. Do you have any final thoughts in terms of the overall topic of AI and ethics? Anything you feel that we did not capture, but it's worth mentioning for sure?
I would say the trust piece of it is really
Yeah.
the biggest one, and those foundations or the factors into it are going to be: is it fair?
Mm-hmm.
Is it transparent? Is it robust enough to protect itself from intrusions and manipulation? Is it do the end users know that they're interacting with it? So are we being accountable and forthcoming to say this is a chatbot that you're working with, and then how are we protecting the data?
Mm-hmm. Appreciate that. I feel like those are some solid, tangible takeaways that we can then use. Once again, you just heard from Erik Dullea, partner at Husch Blackwell. Erik just shared his thoughts, his predictions, and overall feedback and commentary to the topic of AI and ethics. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back in about an hour.